My name is Steve Souders. I work at Fastly. I'm the Chief Performance Officer there. And the first thing I want to ask is, how many people here are part of the web community? I'll wait. Come on. Yes, you. Yes. In the white. Okay. So I think this is really, really awesome. So I'm in the sponsor room, right? Fastly, everyone who speaks in here, the person who's right before me from Rackspace, paid money to speak to you guys. And here's Fastly, a CDN company, paying money to let me talk to you about something that is even outside my main wheelhouse today, about perception and psychology and speed. And I just think that that is really, really awesome. And I've been fortunate Yahoo and Google were similar in that way, and there are a lot of companies that way. And I think it's very different than most other industries where there is so much participation, even to the point of companies ponying up money to share their knowledge and best practices and tips for people with other people, even with competitors. I think that's very cool. And so I'm certainly very psyched. I knew this about Fastly before I joined, that they were very much in support of making the web faster. I just think it's cool that 2.5 days into it, they give me the opportunity to do this talk with everyone. So let's get started. I'll try to get through this in 50 minutes. I should probably turn on a timer. You have a wristwatch. Can you tell me what we're done at 3:30? Like, give me a 2-minute warning. So here's my Twitter handle, The Perception of Speed. How many people here have seen me talk before? Okay. It's been a hard day. That didn't help. So people who have heard me talk before, you know I always start with a photo of myself as a kid. And so here I am. I'm joking. This isn't me, but this could have been me. I mean, like, this kid, he's in a Flash costume, right? And he's running incredibly fast. Now, in fact, is he running incredibly fast? No, he is not. He's a pretty young kid. I bet I could beat this guy. But, you know, he's got the Flash costume on. Someone has touched up the photo. He's probably got this on his desk all the way through college and maybe beyond. And it was that, to him, if you had asked him, his perception would have been, yes, I am going really, really fast. And so all of us probably, maybe more as kids, you know, spend a lot of time. I know I enjoyed looking at these optical illusions, different types and patterns. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to try to find some performance illusions where our perception of what we were seeing or experiencing in terms of speed was completely divorced, in many cases completely unrelated to the actual speed of things. So, of course, this is a web conference, so I need to talk about web stuff, but first we're going to talk about a bunch of non-web examples of this, and I think this is the fun part of the talk, and then the second half is really boring. So here's the first example, and I've got little URLs down there, and I would say I think about 50% of these examples are urban legends, but we'll just assume that they're all true. And so people know what this is, right? This is the crossing button. You press this, and the crosswalk light changes. And so you can see this one, you know, it says New York City. So you go to New York City and you see people, and maybe even yourself, you walk up to the intersection, you're pressing this thing. You know, the more you press it, the sooner it will change is the way it works. So you press it more frequently. And it turns out, in actuality, that about 3/4 of those buttons aren't connected to anything. In the 1980s, they put about 75% of the traffic lights on a computer synchronized system. And so, of course, the last thing they want is someone coming up and randomly pushing the button out of sequence and throwing the whole system off. And so they were faced with this situation where, you know, they've got 2,500 poles that have buttons on them that aren't connected to anything, and it's going to cost millions of dollars to go out there and, you know, reconfigure all the poles, so they just leave it. And people there today, 30 years later, are still pressing these buttons. And every once in a while, you walk up to the light and you press the button and the light changes. And that reinforces your belief that you do have some control, some input on your experience. And people love that. They love to think that they're in control. They don't want to be out of control and subjected to a slow, stress, anxiety-inducing experience. There's something very similar for people who go on the London Underground. They have these open and close buttons. Same thing. You go there, especially during the commute hours, and people are trying to quickly get the doors to close so the train can take off, and press the buttons to get it to open when the train is stopped. And there's only one person on the train who can control when the doors open and close, and that's the train operator on every train in the London Underground. And yet every day people are pounding on these buttons. They're kind of like a placebo button. People are getting stressed about getting to work on time or wherever they have to go, and it actually reduces their stress to have something that they can, again, every once in a while press that button and have the door open like immediately, and they feel like they had input on that. So talking about placebo buttons, this is one of my favorite placebo buttons. This is my wife's Fiat 500. This is the J-Lo car. And then they got Pitbull to pimp it for a while, which I thought was cool. And you can see it's about the same size as the mailbox. I mean, the mailbox is further in the background, so it distorts the actual size. But it's about that big, and yet in this car, there's a sport button. And my wife loves this button. Like, we'll stop at a traffic light, and she'll look over at me like Tom Cruise in Risky Business in his dad's Porsche, and she'll look at me and kind of wink and press the sport button, and then the light turns green and she peels out, and I don't have the heart to tell her that the Fiat 500 has half the horsepower of a Ford Fiesta. And I read up on the button. It doesn't make you go faster. It makes it feel like you're going faster. It makes the steering a little tighter and things like that. No actual impact on your absolute speed whatsoever. This is definitely a true case. This is this case happened at the Houston airport where they found they had a lot of complaints about people having to wait for their baggage at the baggage claim. And so they brought in more baggage handlers, and the complaints stayed the same, didn't have any impact. So they looked at it, and they found that it took about 8 minutes from the time someone walked from the gate to when their bag came out at the baggage claim. And at that time, it took 1 minute to walk to the baggage claim and 7 minutes to wait for your bag. And again, I don't know for people who wait at airports. I hate waiting at airports. I don't know anyone. I'm usually by myself. Have gotten off this flight, and I don't have Wi-Fi, and half the time I don't have a cell signal, so I can't use my phone. And it's torture, right? 7 minutes of torture. So what did they do? They analyzed the problem. They saw that the perception was this wait time. And so they added additional diverters, walls, and hallways to increase the walk from 1 minute to 6 minutes so that you only had to wait 2 minutes and the complaint stopped. Same amount of time, 8 minutes from you walking from the gate to picking up your bag and leaving, but the wait time was much less. People hate to wait. I know I do. So this is a classic example from the 1940s after the World War, with the influx of GIs returning. The elevators in major metropolitan cities were overloaded. The capacity was exceeded, and so people had to wait a long time to get up and down to their offices on upper floors. And so, one thing they could have done is they could have ripped out the interior of these buildings and added more elevators. But instead, they realized that this was a weight perception problem. And so what did they do? They added mirrors, and today we add TVs, to the lobbies of elevators and inside the elevators and even inside cabs to distract you from that wait time, to keep your mind occupied during that wait time. The wait time's the same. Your perception of that wait time is much better than it would be without these psychological techniques. If we talk about wait, there's no one better in the world at managing wait time than Disney, and they have all these techniques like if it's a 20-minute wait, they actually tell you 30 minutes. And this might bum you out when you first get in line, but you look at your clock and it's 3 o'clock and you think you'll get in at 3:30 and you get in at 3:20 and you are so pumped. I love this place. Disney is awesome. I get into every ride earlier than I should. And so that's one technique they have. The other one that we all know is they make the lines go around corners, and you get into Space Mountain, the building, and you get up to where the ride is, and then you see that there's another bunch of cattle call lines going back and forth. But that again, if you saw this really huge line, the progress would be much slower. Psychologically, they found that this is a much better way to manage people's perceptions of waiting. So, in general, with these studies and with my work in the world of web performance, this is the way it generally works, is as you increase speed, the goodness or the perception of how enjoyable the experience is goes up. And but usually when we do this speed stuff, it involves work, more or less work, but usually it involves work to make, in my world, websites faster. And so I wanted to find, but then the goodness goes up. I wanted to see if there were any examples that were in that quadrant where you could actually do less work and still have the goodness of perceived speed. And I found a couple of those. This is, in fact, Ilya used this example in his keynote this morning. This is Jeff Veen, who joined Google and was working on Blogger. And he tells this story about how when people would go through the blog creation wizard and hit create my blog, they would sit and stare at it. And they would go, okay, well, this is a picture of what my blog is going to look like. Now, where do I actually tell you to create it? Because it happened so quickly. So they just added a spinner after you said create my blog, and it created your blog instantaneously, but it didn't show you for 2 seconds. And then when it showed you, users were like, cool, my blog looks awesome. And so they actually over-engineered it. They did too much work, and they actually had to pull it back so that the perception of that would be better. Another example is these Coinstar machines where in usability testing they found that you could dump a bucket of change in there and it would count it really quickly, so quickly that people doubted the accuracy of the amount that they were refunded. And so what they did was they just update the counter that tells you how much money you have. They update it slower, and if there aren't any more coins to go through, they play a recording of coins going through a metal chute. And then they show people what the total, and people are like, oh, okay, yeah, $5.75, fine. So again, they over-engineered it. They could have actually built a slower system and would have actually had a better perception for people. Okay, so what does this have to do? So that was the fun part. What does this have to do with the web? So actually, I think this is the fun part for those of us who are in the web community. What does this have to do with the web? So I'm always reminded when I first Yahooed for web performance. Yahoo, get it? I was at Yahoo at the time. I Yahooed for web performance. I only found 2 articles, one from David Hyatt from the Safari team, and this one. And this one I actually kind of buried because the takeaway kind of worked against my efforts to make the web faster. What they found was they brought people in and they asked them to do various tasks like buy an airplane ticket, buy shoes, and afterwards they asked them, what did you think about it? How hard was it? Was it stressful? How fast did you think it was? Was it fast or slow? But behind the scenes, they also had a packet sniffer. They were tracking all the traffic, so they knew how fast or slow the websites were. And it turned out that the website that was perceived to be the fastest, Amazon, was technically the slowest. And those of us who know Amazon, who use it frequently, aren't surprised at this. Amazon is really, really good at showing you the stuff above the fold that you need to finish your transaction if you're really focused on shopping. And then they load all of that cross-promotion stuff below the fold. Reviews, other products that people have searched for, what other people have actually bought, things you've recently searched for, all of that is below the fold. But they get the stuff above the fold to render very, very quickly. And then they have the action buttons of what you want to do, the pricing to add to my cart, very, very visible. And so people, even though technically it's the slowest website, people felt it was like the fastest website. So I always think back on that and think how important perception is to the websites that we build. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about how those perceptions are things that we can actually do as web developers to enhance the experience that people have on our websites. So most of this is targeted at web developers, but also there's some pieces in here for browser developers. And this is a shout out of something good that browsers have done for as long as I can remember. So suppose you search for Steve Souders and you get a search result page and you click on a link. So what happens when you click on the link? It kicks off a DNS request. You get back the IP address. It's going to actually establish a TCP connection to my server, right? And it's going to request the HTML document, and it's going to get back the first packet of HTML, right? Now, I don't know about you, But if it was me, when someone clicked on a link, I would clear the browser. How many people would do that? There's only one idiot in the room. Browsers don't do that. Even though you've clicked the link, and even though it's already gotten the first packet back, it still shows the previous page, right? And this is really smart, and we saw from those other examples how people hate to wait. They hate to stare at nothing. If their mind is occupied, it's a more positive experience. So one thing we could do, one thing I would have done, is I would have cleared the page and they'd be staring at a blank page here, and there's nothing to occupy their mind. But instead, browsers leave the previous page there. So we go further, and we actually get the HTML, maybe we get some scripts and links and header information. So at this point, it's created the HTML document. Should it clear the page? I would have, but browsers don't. They still leave the page there, even after it has created the HTML document object and is parsing that HTML. It still leaves the previous page. In fact, it doesn't clear the page until the body element is created. So this is really important because when you get that head part and it contains scripts that block rendering, there could still be a significant amount of time, seconds, before the body element can be created because scripts block the parser from proceeding with creating DOM elements. So it's really smart for them to not clear the previous page. There's no way that anything can be rendered until the body element is created. So it's really smart that they do that. They clear the page, and now you might have some more scripts that you have to parse. So the page is blank until all of the render blocking stuff is done, and then they can start rendering the page. Now, I think this is better, but in my opinion, no one should ever stare at a blank page. So would it be better if browsers waited until the first paint event before they clear the previous page? I think so. And there's actually, this isn't, you can read the blog post. Some browsers, I think Chrome has a timeout. They will keep the previous page for up to 5 seconds, and then they'll clear it even if the body element hasn't been created. And the reason for that is to give people feedback. If I click on a link and I still am staring at the old page, I might click it again or hit reload or something like that. So this, at least, even though it's blank, is giving people feedback, but I think we could do a better job of that. And in fact, I think that we could do a better job on how, I think browser vendors can do a better job on how they give people feedback that pages are loading. So right now, there are these things that I call busy indicators. So one that I know I refer to a lot is the tab logo. If a new page is loading, the tab icon is spinning. That gives me feedback. There's a status bar telling me that it's loading stuff. Sometimes the cursor changes to a busy cursor. That is, I think, the best feedback. Some browsers have built-in progress bars. It turns out the reload, the like yin-yang circular thing, turns to an X in most browsers when the page is loading. So you can stop the load all in one UI widget. And at least on the iPhone, you get this network icon, which is really outside of the browser, but it's still a great way to perceive if your click was heard, if the page is loading. So I did this extensive study of these busy indicators because there's a lot of browsers out there and a lot of situations that we're trying to load stuff that users are interacting with. I wanted to see how these browser indicators, these busy indicators, were triggered under these different conditions. So here's where we are trying to show people like a new photo with a dynamic image, or they requested something and we're loading the script dynamically. And so I created tests for each one of these, and I found which ones triggered any busy indicators and which ones didn't. So these don't trigger any busy indicators. If you're doing things, and these do, and so these are really good techniques to use if the user action is something that is synchronous. Like, I want to see the body of this email. Then you should give the user a busy indicator that you're actually fetching that, as opposed to, here's my list of friends, and you update it in the background with who's online and offline, or what song they're listening to, or stock quotes updating. That is not something that is synchronous. The user didn't request that. It's something that's happening in the background. So these asynchronous techniques would be much better. So I was just experiencing this today. I was using a upload tool, and it was modifying the UI of the page of the files listed with an XHR, but that doesn't generate any busy icons, indicators in the browser. And so I was actually sitting there wondering, well, did it upload the thing? How come it's not refreshed? Do I have to reload it? And then finally, waiting long enough, the page would re-render and draw the new file contents. So if you are using these techniques for something that's synchronous, the onus is on you to trigger something that's a busy indicator in the page, a progress bar or a spinner or some other techniques. For the sake of time, I'm going to skip over this detail. This is just on every browser I tested for these different techniques that trigger busy indicators, what was actually triggered and what wasn't. And of course, we see that the browsers are inconsistent in what they trigger. So if you're using different browsers, you're going to have a different perception of what's going on. And one of the best ones to me to give feedback, especially for clicks, is the cursor changing, and yet it's against the Apple design guideline to do that. And so that only happens on Windows. If you remember, all of the other busy indicators are outside of the page. So my area of focus when I click a link is in the page. And on the Mac, there is nothing in that area of focus to give me feedback. I have to change my area of focus to look at the status bar or the tab icon to see if something is happening. So I think, again, there's nothing that stops web developers from changing the cursor. I think it's good to give feedback at the area of focus. But it is important to think about these browser busy indicators when we work with web views on mobile. In fact, they say on iOS, Facebook is the I think either the first or second most popular browser that's used is the embedded web view inside of Facebook, because people are on Facebook all the time and they click links and it opens inside of Facebook's web view. And you notice here that the busy indicators are completely inconsistent. There are no busy indicators built into web views, and so it's up to the web view wrapper to add whatever busy indicator they want, and they don't adhere to the native browser at all. And if you're building native apps, there's no busy indicators at all. You get a splash screen in the old Windows 3.1 days of starting up executables. And so this is really bad. So if you're building native apps, you should make sure that they load really quickly so users get feedback on what's happening. Then there are some other techniques I talked about adding progress indicators. Here we can see that on the YouTube page on desktop, it adds a progress indicator. But it's really hard to make these accurate. Like on this page, this is YouTube. The main video I want has not been displayed, and none of the thumbnails of the other related videos have been displayed, and yet the progress indicator's at like the 90 or 95% mark. It's just not, this page is not 90 or 95% complete. And so it's misleading. There's nothing in browsers right now to help developers get a better indication of the status of the page loading. For example, browsers know they queue up all the requests that they have to make, 95 requests, and they know how many they've already done, but there's no way to get that information through JavaScript. If browsers would just make that available through a JavaScript API, some progress bar, some homespun progress bar like this could be much more accurate. But I think that we really want to steer away from these spinners and progress bars. We don't want to have a progress indicator just for the sake of having a progress indicator. So I want to start a discussion around these things I call natural progress indicators, where the progress is actually part of the experience, the workflow that the user is going through. And I wanted to highlight some examples of those. This is the Google search app that you could get on iOS. And if you do a search for Steve Souders, you get these links. And if you click on a link, this is what happens. It opens a new tab automatically, and it starts sliding it in. For these kind of dynamic actions, you want to wait 1 to 200 milliseconds before starting it. And then it takes about 200 milliseconds for it to slide in. And in the background, it's downloading all the web page stuff. So it's given the page 400 milliseconds to kind of get its act together while the user's mind is still preoccupied with this motion going across the page. And then when the page finally arrives, it gets rendered. So this is, I think, a great example of having a progress indicator that is not a spinner or a bar. It's part of your flow. You don't really realize it's a progress indicator, but it is. It is keeping your mind occupied while stuff is happening in the background. I think that's a great example. And it's interesting. I talked before about how browsers don't refresh the page until the new page is down. But if you click on a link that opens into a new tab, like links in Twitter, we show you a new tab automatically, immediately, that is completely blank. This is something that browsers did a lot of work to avoid when you're within tab. Why is it that browsers forgot all of that intent when you open a new tab? There's no reason that this couldn't be slid in, that it couldn't be open and have an opacity that fades from showing you the page that's behind and fades as the new page comes in, or some other design treatment like that to help users be occupied while they're waiting. People don't like to wait. This is another example from Instagram. I would bet there are several people here that have already deployed this technique, where if you click the like button, it sends your like request up to the server and updates the server to store that you liked it. But it doesn't wait for that to happen before it updates the UI. It updates the UI immediately. So it gives you that feedback, and you can continue on with what you're doing. And in the background, it's sending that hit to the server. Now, they do have to deal with the situation where that feedback to the server fails, but that doesn't happen very often. That's not that hard to deal with. But it gives the user a much better experience. They're not waiting. They get that feedback immediately. This is another one. Both of these last two examples come from Luke Robleski down in Los Gatos. This is his mobile app, Polar, and he does something he calls skeleton screens. It's kind of like progressive rendering, but it's a little more deliberate, laying out the skeleton or the grid of the page that's going to get filled. And so when you ask to see a poll, he knows what the layout is, and he'll start laying it out, and he'll fill in. The text gets there first, so he'll fill in the text, and then he'll fill in the imagery when that arrives. And so it gives the user can already start engaging with the page as it comes down. They know what to expect. It's not reflowing. And so it's a really good way to, again, to have a progress indicator that doesn't hit you over the head that it's a progress indicator. It's actually part of your workflow with the page. How's my time? 3 minutes. Okay. I think that'll work. So if you do a search on Flickr, this is what you'll get while it's loading. Now, I just want to point out, I did this on a Mac. To get a screenshot on the Mac, I have to do Control, Command, Shift, 4, let go, hit the space bar, and then click the touchpad. And I was able, this was on the screen for so long, I was able to do that and capture the screenshot, right? It is not an insignificant amount of time that people are looking at these partially rendered pages. I don't know about you, I'm not feeling good about this. Like, it's really not an engaging experience. Same thing if you do an image search. Like, I'm really not getting a lot of information from that. Look what Pinterest does. I search for bookcase. Text is there, and so it renders immediately. And it fills in these squares where the images are going to be. And how did it pick those colors? Let's look at the final page. What's the main color here? Brown? What's the main color here? Green? It's actually calculated the median color on the final image and shows you that to, again, make that transition smoother. And it also is showing me some text information about the actual website that this image is coming from. Now, when I do this image search, if you hover over the image, it's going to give me text information. It's going to give me the dimensions of the image, the website that the image came from. To me, like, this would be so much better. If you want to calculate the median color, that's awesome too. But they already have the text. Show the text here so I can start seeing which images might be close to the size I want, or which is that image from nationalgeographic.com or whatever that I really am looking for. So I think there's work that web developers could do along these lines as well. So I really care about making websites faster, and I love quantifying that and measuring performance and improving that performance over time. But by default, most metrics that you're going to see for performance are on window onload. And we use window onload because it's a proxy for what we really care about doing. What do we really care about doing? We really care about making the user experience as fast and enjoyable as possible. And so as much as I love metrics, it's really the tail wagging the dog. The metrics we have are a proxy for what we're really trying to optimize. We've got to keep our eye on the ball. That is true. I've used one image for 2 metaphors. We've got to keep our eye on the ball. The real thing we're trying to maximize is not some metric that we have that doesn't really reflect our true goal. What we're really trying to do is improve the user experience with our websites as much as possible. So whether the people here are developers or designers or PMs or performance engineers, what we all are is perception brokers. And that's what we have to maximize. Thank you.